Today, we are strapping in for a pretty extensive examination of a modern cultural paradox, a paradox that often comes wrapped up in a Hawaiian shirt. Taika Waititi.
He is, without question, probably the most interesting subject for a deep dive right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Because his career trajectory, it represents this fundamental conflict you see at the heart of modern Hollywood.
The indie versus the machine.
Exactly. He is the quirky, award-winning indie darling who, built his reputation on these intimate, often heartbreaking New Zealand stories. But he is simultaneously the director that the biggest global corporations, we're talking Disney, Marvel, HBO, Netflix, they trust him implicitly with their most valuable IP.
That's the core of the mystery we have to unpack, isn't it? The sheer range. I mean, one minute he gives us these critically intimate narratives about kids coping with, the profound pain of absent fathers or confronting Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and gives us screaming space goats in the middle of a massive Marvel Cinematic Universe blockbuster. He operates in these two worlds high art and the highest volume at the same time.
He is a bundle of contradictions, yes. And the sources we've gathered today, reviews, industrial reports, academic analyses, they all sort of crystallize his career into this fantastic, really challenging central concept. We're calling it the multifarious multiplexity of Taika Waititi.
Multifarious multiplexity. That sounds like an expensive industrial machine. Okay, let's unpack that. Let's define those two pillars because I think they describe his career better than any single genre label ever could.
I agree completely. So the first half, multifariousness, that refers to the sheer expansive diversity of his creative output.
The what?
The what? Exactly. We are talking about jumping constantly across genres and formats. You've got a short film that earns him an Oscar nomination, then a record-breaking local New Zealand drama that's immediately followed by directing a major blockbuster franchise, then co-creating a prestigious indigenous television series, and at the same time starring in an absurdist mockumentary. The breadth of that stylistic jump is just enormous.
From the quiet, character-driven chaos of eagle versus shark to the massive, galaxy-spanning action of Thor, Love and Thunder. And then, to the understated genius of What We Do in the Shadows and its television spinoffs, that's not just range. It's almost like having 3 or 4 parallel careers running at once.
Yeah, that brings us right to the second word, multiplexity. This is the phenomena of his simultaneous ubiquity, the saturation of the mainstream media landscape.
Right.
He's not just a director working on one project. He is concurrently functioning as a writer, a producer for other artists, a prolific actor in multiple shows, and a co-creator. And it's all across the most visible global platforms. Theaters, Disney+, HBO Max, FX. He is everywhere you look, all at once, filtering massive amounts of content through his single, distinctive personality.
So the deep dive mission today is to figure out the mechanics of that. How does he manage this constant, prolific, creative deployment? And more importantly, how does an artist maintain a distinctive, recognizable, artistic voice, his status as an auteur, while operating at such an enormous industrial scale and volume? What happens when a singular style meets a never-ending machine?
Precisely. And to understand how we even acquired this level of industrial power, the ability to be multiplex, we need to quickly track the rise. His path to critical acclaim began, incredibly early. He received an Academy Award nomination in 2005 for his 2003 short film, Two Cars, One Night.
Wow, that early.
That early. And it immediately signaled that he was a singular voice, already honing his comedic tone amidst this really poignant observational drama.
And his early features weren't just stepping stones. They were nationally significant events in New Zealand. His 2010 film, Boy, which he also starred in as the absent, kind of irresponsible father, and then 2016's pitch-perfect Hunt for the Wilderpeople, both became the highest-grossing New Zealand films of all time at their respective releases. That's a serious indicator of local commercial and critical success.
That local leverage gave him the cultural capital he needed to pivot to the global sphere, which, culminated in his critical apex with Jojo Rabbit in 2019. Winning the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay made him a globally recognized auteur.
Absolutely.
And for the collectors of facts out there, it's also important to note he won a Grammy Award for producing that film's soundtrack.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it just proves the reach of his creative influence extends across various media. He also holds the distinction of being the first person of Maori descent to win an Academy Award in the screenplay category.
So he has the critical, cultural, and commercial trifecta just locked down. Now, the sources we analyzed, they capture him at a fascinating and maybe precarious moment. It's just after the triumph of Jojo Rabbit, when his power was peaking, but before the significantly polarizing critical reception of his 2022 Marvel sequel and his 2023 sports drama, Next Goal Wins.
It's a snapshot right before the critical dialogue fundamentally shifted. It moved from celebrating his unique portable style to questioning whether that style, when applied at maximum multiplexity at the highest volume, was beginning to strain his creative integrity.
Right.
We are essentially examining the consequences of giving an unrestrained artistic flavor a blank check budget and, well, unlimited output potential.
Okay, so to understand that modern critical backlash, we first need to isolate the essential core of his artistic identity. What defines a Waititi-esque film, whether it's a tiny feature shot in rural New Zealand or a multi-million-dollar superhero movie?
The foundation of his identity, as the sources repeatedly stress, is philosophical. It's about positioning himself outside the traditional mold. During a 2010 TED Talk, he explicitly took issue with the label filmmaker. He stated very clearly, "My job is to express myself."
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it immediately tells you that his work prioritizes raw, personal expression and tonal signature over, say, traditional technical craftsmanship.
That focus on raw personality certainly explains why his films feel so dominated by his voice. He's often confessed to a sort of purposeful technical indifference, admitting he still gets confused about camera angles, technical jargon, equipment names. He doesn't let the machinery dictate the tone.
Right. He doesn't substitute technical mastery with anything. He elevates his recognizable personality as the central aesthetic. And that personality is deeply rooted in his complex intersectional heritage. He famously describes himself as a Polynesian Jew.
Which highlights his mixed ancestry.
Exactly. His father was an artist of Maori descent, specifically from the Te Wanoa tribe, and his mother was a school teacher with Russian, Jewish, Irish, and French-Canadian background.
That's a fascinating, diverse background. It's not just one perspective, but an entire dialogue happening within his own self. Which perhaps explains why his films are always so focused on outsiders trying to find a place in a world that doesn't quite fit them.
That's it. And that intersectional lens leads directly to his core thematic consistency, what the sources call the persistent rejection of the adult perspective. This is the nucleus of his critical coherence, regardless of the budget.
Let's elaborate on that. What does rejecting the adult perspective actually look like on screen?
The sources argue that Waititi privileges a vision of the world channeled almost exclusively through the eyes of children, or sometimes fully grown characters who just refuse to conform to conventional definitions of maturity.
The man-child archetype.
Very much so. He utilizes whimsical and nonsensical humor to challenge conventional definitions of maturity and development. It's an embrace of juvenile absurdity as a critical tool.
His filmography is just dominated by that outsider archetype and this struggle for nonlinear maturation.
Look at the examples. In his debut feature, Eagle vs. Shark, you have Jared. He is the quintessential awkward man-child with the terrible mullet. His entire identity is built around trying to live up to this impossible heroic ideal of his dead, perfect older brother.
He's stuck.
He's emotionally and socially stunted, living in a fantastical shell of his own making because the adult world is just too hard to face.
Then you jump to the orphan Ricky Baker in Hunt for the Wilderpeople. Here is a child who, to cope with the profound pain of abandonment and the broken foster care system, he romanticizes the Skuksos life. He performs this exaggerated version of toughness to mask his deep need for belonging.
And of course, the most widely recognized example is Jojo Betzler in Jojo Rabbit. Here, the fascism he embraces is itself a childish, simplistic, dogmatic answer to the complexity of the adult world. His best friend is an imaginary version of Adolf Hitler.
Right.
His true emotional development, his maturation, is achieved only when he explicitly rejects the rigid, childish ideology that Hitler represents. He chooses vulnerable humanity over rigid, hateful dogma.
And this brings us to the unique tonal hybridity of his early, critically acclaimed works. The comedy isn't just a style, it's a functional mechanism. The sources clarify that the dark material is the fuel.
Yes. This is where we need to spend some time because it's crucial.
Yeah.
The profound sadness and emotional trauma, the absent childish fathers and boy, the death and abandonment in Wilderpeople, the constant threat of totalitarian violence in Jojo Rabbit, those harrowing narratives are the source material for the humor. The characters use comedy to survive the narrative.
So the joke isn't just inserted for levity, it's the natural, necessary expression of a character trying to cope with an unbearable reality.
Exactly. The comedy is understood not as a distraction, but as the natural response to the tragedy, a vital coping mechanism. Think of that emotional gut punch in Jojo Rabbit when he finds his mother's body.
Oh, that scene.
The subsequent scene, where he is forced to confront that unimaginable loss, is immediately followed by a nonsensical moment of emotional release. That balance, where the humor serves as structural integrity, is what gave his early films their emotional depth and critical acclaim.
And his personal identity isn't just thematic. It has a clear industrial and cultural purpose. He uses his position as a high-profile Maori filmmaker to actively challenge conventional Hollywood depictions of indigenous people.
He spoke about this philosophical stance directly. He said, "There is a power in allowing indigenous people to be mundane and silly."
I love that.
It's a conscious, active subversion of the outdated noble savage trope. He shows indigenous characters who are complex, sometimes disconnected from traditional skills, and just struggling with urban or contemporary life like anyone else.
And this cultural mission is directly supported by his commercial success. It's the ultimate one for them, one for me strategic calculation, where the them is the global blockbuster machine.
His massive box office success with Marvel provides the industrial leverage, the capital, and the creative cover necessary to greenlight those smaller, culturally specific projects that Hollywood would typically ignore. He's strategically using the resources of the multiplex to deploy genuine, nuanced cultural representation.
And we see that industrial power leveraged not just for his own directorial work, but to elevate other minority voices too. He actively serves as an executive producer for highly acclaimed projects like the indigenous teen show Reservation Dogs, which he co-created,
Incredible show.
and films directed by other Maori or indigenous filmmakers like The Breaker-Uppers, Night Raiders, and Fry Bread Face and Me. His personal success becomes a vehicle for broader cultural deployment.
That strategy, using global leverage to fund personal, rigorous expression, worked perfectly, right up until the point where his highly distinctive personal expression was applied without sufficient artistic restraint to the biggest commercial products on Earth.
The inflection point everyone points to is Thor, Ragnarok, in 2017. That film was universally hailed as a massive success, precisely because it balanced the deep pathos of Asgard's destruction and Thor's trauma with genuinely earned comedy on a razor's edge. It revived a flagging franchise.
Yes, Ragnarok benefited from a really solid script and a clear emotional roadmap. But then came the sequel, Thor, Love and Thunder, in 2022. And this is where the critical consensus just broke. The multifariousness of his style was accused of descending into inconsistency and excessive unearned irony.
The critical language was harsh. Critics described Love and Thunder as an overload of goofiness. It felt like two disjointed movies crammed together. The key critique was that his pervasive signature humor began to invade and infect potentially serious character-defining scenes.
Absolutely. The sources note that the script's structure never allowed poignant moments to truly land because the pace of comedy was just relentless. Think of Jane Foster's Cancer arc, a fundamentally serious, heartbreaking storyline.
Right.
Or Christian Bale's gore, the God Butcher's dramatic motivation. These heavy storylines are consistently overshadowed, undercut, and just rushed to squeeze in another gag. The film felt bombastic, and some critics argue that many of the jokes felt like an indulgent, inside joke with the director.
This is where we see the style transform from an asset to a liability. If, in Boy, humor is deployed as a natural response to tragedy, in Love and Thunder, what was it deployed as?
Well, the sources suggest the humor transitioned into an indulgent, self-serving mechanism of flippancy.
A shield, almost.
Exactly, a shield. That flippancy was perceived as a creative shield, a way to dodge criticism and constantly destabilize narrative stakes, making sure no moment got too heavy or too meaningful. This resulted in the film feeling hollow compared to the emotional grounding of his earlier work.
Like the Screaming Goats.
The Screaming Space Goats are a perfect, constant example of this. They were funny for a minute, but their constant, aggressive presence undercut any gravity the mission was meant to carry.
And what about the dilution of stakes? This is a major structural argument here, particularly regarding the villain. Christian Bale's Gore was an incredibly complex character with sympathetic motivations rooted in this philosophical crisis of suffering and death, despite the existence of seemingly indifferent gods. That is a phenomenal premise at its core.
He had the potential to be a defining MCU villain, one who could carry significant emotional weight. Critics widely felt that Gore could carry a whole saga like Thanos, but that philosophical weight was fundamentally wasted. It was diluted due to the overwhelming comedy and the structural decision to minimize his screen time in favor of gags.
Like the love triangle with the hammers?
The bizarre love triangle involving Thor's two sentient weapons, Mjolnir and Stormbreaker.
Yeah. This points directly to the core industrial critique, doesn't it? The perception of lacking restraint. The narrative from the sources is that following the massive, unexpected success of Ragnarok, Waititi was seemingly handed a blank check and total creative freedom by the studio system.
And that unprecedented level of creative freedom without sufficient editorial discipline led to the qualitative drop. The critique wasn't that the studio hired the wrong person, but that the backlash stemmed from the consequence of rapid production and expanded creative control. It suggested that in the vast machinery of Marvel, no one was there to tell him, no, that's dumb, or that joke undermines the character arc. The studio sought his distinctive flavor, but by allowing its uncurbed application, they risked overwhelming the very narrative structure they sought to revitalize.
Now, beyond the creative and structural issues, the sources highlight a couple of significant external controversies around the film that damaged the brand's perception. The first involves the visual effects community, which is crucial context for massive studio productions.
This was a really poorly timed incident. Waititi and Tessa Thompson were criticized for appearing in a Vanity Fair video where they seemed to mock the film's visual effects, commenting flippantly on the finished product. This video circulated at the exact same time that VFX artists were publicly speaking out against being aggressively overworked and severely underpaid by the studio system.
So regardless of their intent, the director and star's public comments came across as incredibly insensitive to the production context. It seemed like they were poking fun at the very artists who were struggling under the system that afforded them their freedom.
Precisely. And the second major issue, which was arguably more damaging to his personal brand promise, was the controversy surrounding LGBTQ+ representation, specifically the charge of queerbaiting.
Right. Waititi, who is openly queer, had significantly raised expectations by exclaiming the film would be super gay at the London premiere Q&A, especially regarding the characters of Valkyrie and Korg.
However, critics and moviegoers, particularly those in the queer community, expressed profound disappointment. The argument was that the expectations for prominent LGBTQ+ characters and themes just were not met in the final film. The creators talked up the representation when it ultimately was not a massive part of the experience, leading many to feel Marvel had used the promise of representation to generate progressive buzz.
A classic queerbaiting scenario.
Classic scenario, yes.
And we know that this lack of prominence didn't shield the film from consequences.
No, it did not. Despite the muted representation, the film was still banned in several Middle Eastern countries, including Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Malaysia, specifically due to containing LGBT elements.
And that was after Disney refused to make the cuts requested by local censorship boards.
So the film managed to disappoint the audience who wanted the representation while still triggering censorship from regimes opposed to it. It just highlights the precarious position of navigating global multiplex storytelling.
We can try to rationalize the issues with his MCU work by saying the blockbuster machine failed him. But his next feature, a smaller, heartfelt sports dramedy based on a true story, seems to confirm that the issue was the style itself becoming too dominant and too indulgent.
Yes. Next Goal Wins from 2023 serves as a perfect, isolated case study on the limits of his applied style. It was based on the incredible true story and a highly acclaimed 2014 documentary of the American Samoa national soccer team.
A team infamously known for suffering the worst loss in professional soccer history, a brutal, soul-crushing 31-0 defeat against Australia in 2001.
Waititi Cat did this story, focusing on the washed-up, emotionally broken Dutch-American coach Thomas Rongen, played by Michael Fassbender. He's tasked with the seemingly impossible mission of getting the team to score a single goal in a World Cup qualifier.
This should have been perfect material for his signature blend of sadness and absurdity.
You think so?
And the result.
It received Waititi's lowest critical scores, being described by one critic as a shoddily made and strikingly unfunny attempt to tell an interesting story in an uninteresting way.
Ouch.
He was criticized for being structurally by the numbers, yet simultaneously disjointed.
The sources detail numerous structural and pacing issues, which were potentially made worse by the fact that the film required significant high-profile reshoots. Armie Hammer's role was entirely reshot and replaced by Will Arnett due to external factors. The final product felt uneven, lacking the earned, patient emotion of his past work like Wilderpeople.
Let's focus on the lead character's journey because that's where a lot of the criticism landed. Critics widely pointed out that the character arc of Coach Thomas Rongan felt abrupt and lacked sufficient emotional motivation.
Absolutely. He transitions too quickly from being a cynical, detached coach who actively dislikes the team to suddenly giving this massive emotional halftime speech. This jump in character felt unearned, as if it occurred simply because we've reached the standard length a movie tends to be before the climax. It wasn't driven by organic character development. The core emotional transformation felt rushed.
And that lack of earned emotion was never more apparent than in the handling of the final game itself. The entire narrative tension is built around scoring that single monumental goal. Yet the film undermined the emotional climax of the final match with a bizarre directorial choice.
Waititi often subverts genre tropes, but here it was potentially catastrophic for the sports drama genre. Instead of showing the real-time tension of the second half of the game, the majority of the crucial action was narrated to the audience in an expository flashback told by a character.
The decision to narrate the climax rather than show it removed the potentially earned emotion of actually witnessing the victory or the tension in real time. It was a structural choice that prioritized a narrative device over the audience's emotional investment.
Even within the overwhelmingly negative critiques, were there any bright spots?
There were. Specific moments of his signature dialogue shine through, proving the creative talent remains. Lines like, "You've got a mouse and a keyboard, but you don't even have a screen."
Right.
And the darkly funny instruction, "Slow down, heaven is full." Those little moments of absurdist wit were noted as bright spots.
But these brief moments of levity couldn't save the overall structure, especially when paired with the element that was almost universally criticized as the worst part of this ordeal, the Taika Waititi self-insert.
Waititi appears throughout the film as a narrating American Samoan priest, frequently breaking the fourth wall. This self-insert was described by critics as unnecessary and grating, drawing unfunny jokes that stretched far too long, often distracting from the main action.
This felt like the epitome of the criticism leveled at Love and Thunder, that his recent work lacks a creative filter, and that his brand personality is now actively overshadowing the necessary narrative discipline required to serve the story.
Now we have to discuss the narrative surrounding Jaya Saloa, played by Kaimana. She is the first openly non-binary and transgender player to compete in a FIFA World Cup qualifier. This character was positioned to be the emotional anchor of the film, but became a major flashpoint for ethical and narrative critique.
The critique centered on how Jaya's deeply personal identity and struggles were framed structurally within the story.
Many critics and trans viewers felt that her identity issues, dealing with dead naming, questions about genitals, and dysphoria, were primarily used as a vehicle for Michael Fassbender's Thomas Rongan to achieve his personal development and redemption.
So it framed these deeply personal issues as a sort of baby's first transphobia teaching moment for the coach. The audience is centered on Rongan's struggle to understand and accept, rather than giving Jaya's own story the required nuance and complexity.
For instance, critics cited scenes where Rongan dead-named her or asked tactless questions about her identity and body. These moments were designed to demonstrate his emotionally broken state and subsequent growth. But this narrative choice structurally centered the cis male coach's struggle over Jaya's actual lived experience, making her character function primarily as a plot device for his arc.
Furthermore, the film's approach to her profound emotional struggle was seen as overly simplistic. The sources specifically mentioned disappointment that the story dropped the significant plotline of her deciding to go off hormones for the qualifying matches.
By doing so, the film suggested that the resolution for her debilitating dysphoria was simply a good talking to, or being handed a captain badge. Critics argued this minimized the reality of the issue and the true complexity of her emotional and physical decision-making process.
And this requires critical cultural nuance. Jaya is Fa'afafin, a recognized third gender in Samoan culture, who are generally widely accepted within that community. That's a very different context from Western narratives of LGBTQ+ struggle.
By imposing a Western-centric narrative of dramatic acceptance and struggle, primarily viewed through the coach's uncomprehending perspective, the film risked simplifying the rich cultural context of the Fa'afafine identity in American Samoa. It was a mismatch between the cultural reality and the genre requirements of a standard redemption arc.
And this leads us to the final significant point the sources raise about Next Goal Wins, the degree of fabrication. We are talking about an adaptation of a true story.
It is crucial to note, based on the material we reviewed, that Waititi's version of the real-life coach, Thomas Rongan, fundamentally changed key facts for dramatic convenience. The real Rongan was not forced to go to American Samoa, he was not an angry alcoholic, and he openly stated he had absolutely no issues with Jaya's identity.
Wow, so the film actively turned him into a rage monster, alcoholic bigot to facilitate the manufactured character arc of redemption.
And to provide the necessary conflict for a Hollywood sports drama. This, too, contributed to the feeling that the unique emotional reality of the source material was being overwritten by generic structure.
So, if we synthesize all this, the tonal messiness of Love and Thunder, the structural failures and character dilution of Next Goal Wins, we return directly to the initial paradox. Is the creative freedom afforded by his blank check success actually the very thing that is hurting the qualitative consistency of his output?
The sources strongly argue that this is the cost of prolificacy and maximum multiplexity. The issue is not the inherent quality of his unique style, but its ubiquitous, unchecked application. When the humor is based in underlying specific trauma and edited tightly, as in Jojo Rabbit or Boy, it creates profound, rigorous tonal hybridity.
But when that portable style is deployed rapidly across a vast industrial multiplex without that rigorous editorial discipline or a strong, stable script holding it down, it collapses into what critics have labeled a tonal mess and forgettable films.
This creates the critical crossroads. Is Taika Waititi a genuine blank-check filmmaker who can retain creative integrity while navigating the enormous studio system? Or has he simply become an overextended brand whose flavor is now applied safely but thinly across various studio franchises?
He's like a chef whose signature spice became so popular, the corporations are now using too much of it in every single dish until the original dish itself is unrecognizable.
That's a great analogy. It's the challenge of substituting his distinctive, portable tonal signature for traditional autorial rigor. That style is a massive industrial asset. It guarantees an identifiable product, but it appears highly prone to diminishing returns when volume outpaces quality control.
However, his ubiquity isn't failing across the board, which is a key counterpoint in the sources. They are careful to note that his television work continues to be highly acclaimed, suggesting that the serialized format or the collaborative constraints of television may provide the necessary rigor that his recent large-scale feature films have lacked.
That includes co-creating the critically lauded indigenous teen show Reservation Dogs,
which has been universally praised for its nuance, cultural authenticity, and profound emotional grounding, all things critics felt were missing from Next Goal Wins.
and of course his work on the series Our Flag Means Death, where he directs, executive produces, and stars as the unforgettable Blackbeard. That also received overwhelmingly positive critical reception. It demonstrates that when the material is focused and constrained, and when the tone is consistently applied by a team with a clear vision, his unique style is still incredibly effective.
And despite the recent critical volatility of his feature films, his industrial leverage remains incredibly high. It confirms the ongoing reality of his multifarious multiplexity. He's not slowing down. Hollywood is still banking on his brand.
Far from it. A glimpse at his upcoming slate shows immense diversity and continued high-stakes engagement with both major IP and prestige literary works. He has a film adaptation of the novel Clara and the Sun forthcoming, a project that demands significant emotional rigor and depth.
And demonstrating his continued leverage in the prestige world, he's directing the adaptation of the Percival Everett novel James, with Steven Spielberg producing. That is high-level literary adaptation.
And he's still diving into massive franchise IP as well. He's attached to a live-action Flash Gordon film, 2 animated series based on Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory for Netflix.
Yeah.
And, perhaps most anticipated, his long-awaited Star Wars film, which he is now co-writing with Tony McNamara, the acclaimed screenwriter of The Favorite and The Great.
So the world is clearly still waiting to see if he can successfully reconcentrate that signature flavor.
It seems so.
So what we have seen is the portrait of a talent so unique that his personality conquered Hollywood and redefined the blockbuster template. But in the process, he created a style so powerful that it risks eating its own substance.
Taika Waititi's unique comedic signature is, at this critical crossroads, both his greatest artistic asset and, when applied without discipline, his greatest liability. He must urgently re-engage with the core thematic commitment of his earlier works, prioritizing depth and emotional grounding, to ensure his style soothes the story, not the other way around.
The sources suggest that the challenge is clear. He must prioritize artistic rigor and depth over sheer volume. And that's to ensure his future expressions are perceived as profoundly heartfelt narratives, rather than merely clever, ubiquitous productions designed to fill the global multiplex schedule.
The machinery of the Hollywood system loved his specific flavor so much they stopped asking him to concentrate it. For you, the listener, the next time you encounter a film where the director's personality is the main selling point, the primary brand you are being sold, ask yourself this: bridging the artistic and the commercial reality. Is the director's unique personality genuinely supporting and illuminating the story's emotional core, or am I just being sold the personality itself? If sadness is truly meant to be the source of the humor, how do you know if the humor has respected its source?
That's a deep thought to leave us on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.